Seo-Yeon had built an empire from nothing. At 32 years old, she was the CEO of Aurora Tech, one of the most innovative technology companies in Seoul. Her name was whispered in boardrooms with a mixture of admiration and fear. Investors spoke of her with reverence, competitors with grudging respect, and employees with a careful distance that came from knowing she could change their lives with a single decision. She wore power like a second skin, draped in tailored white suits and cold confidence, her hair always perfectly styled, her makeup applied with precision, her jewelry minimal but expensive. Everything about her screamed success, control, perfection. But beneath the polished exterior, beneath the perfectly applied makeup and the calculated smiles, beneath the armor she had spent years constructing piece by careful piece, there was a woman who had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Not as a CEO, not as a success story, not as a weapon in a business suit, not as the girl who had clawed her way up from poverty to stand at the top of Seoul's business world, just seen as a person, as a woman with a heart that still beat, even if she had tried to silence it for so long. As someone who sometimes woke up in the middle of the night in her empty penthouse and wondered if this was all there was. Success without connection. Power without love. Victory without anyone to share it with. The rain fell heavy against the floor-to-ceiling windows of her office on the 42nd floor. Seoul stretched below her like a sea of lights, each one representing a life she would never touch, a story she would never know. The city was alive, pulsing with energy and possibility, but up here in her glass tower, Seo-Yeon felt removed from all of it. Isolated. Alone. Seo-Yeon stood there, a glass of wine in her hand, staring at nothing and everything at once. The wine was expensive, imported from France, a gift from a business partner who was probably hoping to curry favor. She barely tasted it. It was just something to hold, something to do with her hands while her mind raced through tomorrow's meetings, next quarter's projections, the endless demands of running a company that employed 3,000 people. It was past midnight. The office was empty. It always was at this hour. She preferred it that way. During the day, the office was a hive of activity, people rushing from meeting to meeting, voices raised in excitement or frustration, the constant hum of productivity. But at night, when everyone had gone home to their families, their friends, their lives, the office became something else. A museum of ambition, a monument to sacrifice. Silence was easier than pretending to be interested in small talk, easier than smiling at people who only wanted something from her. A promotion, a favor, access to her network, her money, her influence. No one came to her office just to talk, just to see how she was doing. They always wanted something, and maybe that was her fault. Maybe she had trained them to see her as a resource rather than a person. Her phone buzzed on the glass desk behind her. Another message, another investor. Another man trying to charm his way into her fortune or her bed, whichever came first. She didn't bother looking. They were all the same. Polished words wrapped around hollow intentions, expensive cologne masking the stench of greed, and hollow promises that crumbled the moment they got what they wanted. She had learned that lesson the hard way years ago, when she was still naive enough to believe that someone could love her for who she was and not what she had. His name had been Jae-sung. He had been charming, attentive, seemingly interested in her dreams and her fears. They had dated for 2 years. She had even imagined marrying him, building a life together. But then Aurora Tech had its breakthrough. The company had gone public. And suddenly Seo-Yeon wasn't just a promising entrepreneur anymore. She was worth millions, and Jae-sung's true colors had shown. The proposals for joint ventures, the suggestions that she invest in his failing business, the increasingly bold requests for money. When she had finally confronted him, when she had asked him directly if he had ever really loved her, he hadn't even had the decency to lie convincingly. Since then, she had built walls, high ones, strong ones, walls that kept people at a safe distance where they couldn't hurt her, couldn't use her, couldn't make her feel foolish for hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone could want her for something other than her bank account. The elevator chimed softly in the distance, the sound echoing through the empty corridors. Seo-Yeon's eyes narrowed. Security should have locked the building hours ago. That was protocol. No one was supposed to be here except her and the overnight security team. She turned, her heels clicking against the marble floor as she walked toward her office door, her posture straightening instinctively, her face settling into the cold mask she wore so well. Through the frosted glass, she could see a figure moving in the hallway. Tall, male, carrying something. For a brief moment, something tightened in her chest. An intruder? Someone trying to steal company secrets? Corporate espionage was not uncommon in their industry, and Aurora Tech had plenty of valuable intellectual property that competitors would love to get their hands on. She opened the door with more force than necessary, her voice sharp and commanding, cutting through the silence like a knife. "Who are you and what are you doing here?" The man froze. He was young, maybe in his late 20s, with dark hair slightly damp from the rain outside, and eyes that held a kind of gentle determination she hadn't seen in a long time. He wore a simple gray sweater and jeans. Nothing like the designer suits that filled her world, nothing like the expensive clothes her executives wore to impress her. His sneakers squeaked slightly on the polished floor. In his hands was a cardboard box filled with what looked like old files and a small potted plant, the kind of cheap succulent you could buy at a convenience store. There was something almost endearing about it, about him, standing there looking slightly embarrassed and thoroughly soaked. "I'm sorry, Miss Han," he said quickly, bowing slightly in the traditional Korean manner, his voice respectful but not afraid. "I'm Lee Min-ho. I work in the engineering department. I was just clearing out my desk. I didn't mean to disturb you." His voice was warm, like honey and sunlight, respectful but not subservient. There was no tremor in it, no fear, despite the fact that he had just been caught by the CEO after hours. There was something different about him, something that made Seo-Yeon pause instead of immediately dismissing him or calling security to have him escorted out. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, directly but not aggressively. Or maybe it was the fact that his first instinct had been to apologize rather than to make excuses. "At midnight?" she asked, her tone still sharp, but curiosity creeping in at the edges despite her best efforts to remain coldly professional. "You're clearing out your desk at midnight?" Min-ho smiled awkwardly, shifting the box in his arms, and Seo-Yeon noticed that his hands were strong but gentle, the hands of someone who worked with tools and computers, who created things. "I work better at night. Quieter. Less people. During the day, there's always someone needing something, always meetings and interruptions. At night, I can actually think." He glanced at her, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no calculation in his gaze, no hidden agenda, no attempt to flatter or manipulate. Just honesty. Just a man explaining his reasoning as if she were a normal person, and not the CEO who could fire him with a word. It unnerved her more than any business negotiation ever had. "Security should have stopped you," Seo-Yeon said, crossing her arms over her chest, partly out of habit, partly because standing this close to someone who seemed so genuine made her feel oddly vulnerable. "I'll be speaking with them tomorrow. We have protocols for a reason. We can't just have people wandering around the building after hours." Min-ho's expression shifted to concern, his brow furrowing. "Please don't. It's my fault. I told them I had permission from my supervisor to retrieve some personal items. I didn't want to wait until Monday because I'm transferring to a different project and they need the desk space. I just needed to finish something before the weekend." He hesitated, then added with a small smile that seemed almost shy, "I heard you were still here. I figured if the CEO works this late, I could too. I mean, if you're still putting in hours at midnight, it seemed reasonable that a regular employee could do the same." Something in his words struck her. Not flattery designed to win her favor. Not ambition disguised as dedication. Just simple logic, delivered with a kind of earnestness that felt foreign in her world, like a language she had once known but had forgotten how to speak. There was no angle, no manipulation, no attempt to use this encounter to advance his career. He wasn't asking for a promotion or trying to make an impression. He was just explaining himself human to human, as if her title didn't create an invisible wall between them. Seo-Yeon studied him for a moment longer, taking in the details. The way his hair fell slightly over his forehead, the honesty in his eyes, the small succulent in the box that he was clearly taking care to not jostle. Finally, she waved her hand dismissively, her voice softening just slightly despite her best efforts. "Fine. Finish what you need to do and leave. And next time, actually get permission instead of improvising. She turned to walk back into her office, back to her wine and her loneliness, and her endless cycle of work and sleep and work again. But his voice stopped her. "Miss Han?" She looked back over her shoulder, her expression carefully neutral. Minho was smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes and created small crinkles at the corners, the kind of smile that came from genuine warmth rather than social obligation. "You should go home too. Even empires need rest. And you look tired. Not in a bad way," he added quickly, as if realizing he might have overstepped. "Just in a way that says you carry too much by yourself." And then he walked away, carrying his box down the hallway toward the elevator, leaving Seo-Yeon standing there in the doorway of her office, completely stunned. No one spoke to her like that. No one dared. She was Han Seo-Yeon, CEO of Aurora Tech, one of the most powerful women in Seoul's tech industry. People bowed to her. They agreed with her. They carefully measured every word they said in her presence, afraid of saying the wrong thing and losing her favor. But he had just told her she looked tired and should go home. He had seen through the armor to the exhaustion underneath, and he hadn't even realized how bold it was. Or maybe he had, and he simply didn't care about the consequences. Either way, it was the most human interaction she had experienced in months, perhaps years. That night, as Seo-Yeon drove home through the rain-slicked streets of Seoul, her hands gripping the steering wheel of her Mercedes a little tighter than necessary, she found herself thinking about Lee Min-ho. Not in the way she thought about business partners or competitors, analyzing their strengths and weaknesses, calculating how they might be useful or dangerous to her, but in a way that felt dangerously close to curiosity, to genuine interest in another human being. Who was he? Why did he work at midnight? What kind of person chose solitude and silence over the social aspects of office life? And why did his smile linger in her mind like a melody she couldn't shake, persistent and gentle and somehow comforting? The rain hammered against her windshield, the wipers working frantically to keep up. The streets were nearly empty at this hour, just a few taxis and delivery trucks making their way through the city. Red lights reflected off the wet pavement like scattered rubies. Normally, Seo-Yeon enjoyed this drive. It was a transitional space between her work life and her home life, a few precious moments where she didn't have to be CEO Han Seo-Yeon, where she could just exist without expectation or judgment. But tonight, her mind kept returning to the encounter, to the way he had looked at her without fear, to the simple kindness in his suggestion that she should rest. When was the last time someone had expressed concern for her well-being without wanting something in return? Her penthouse was exactly as she had left it that morning. Immaculate, sterile, expensive. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furniture in shades of white and gray, art on the walls that cost more than most people earned in a year. Everything was perfect. Everything was empty. She poured herself a glass of water and stood by the window, looking out at the glittering city below, and for the first time in a long time, she felt the weight of her loneliness pressing down on her like a physical thing. The next morning, Seo-Yeon arrived at Aurora Tech with her usual precision. Perfectly styled hair pulled back into a sleek low bun, immaculate makeup that accentuated her features without being too dramatic, a navy suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, tailored to fit her exactly, paired with heels that added 3 inches to her height and made a satisfying click against the marble floors. She walked through the lobby with her head high, acknowledging the respectful bows from employees with small nods, her assistant Min Jung trailing behind her with a tablet full of meetings and emergencies that needed her attention, rattling off the day's schedule in rapid-fire Korean. But as she passed the engineering department, Seo-Yeon slowed. Just slightly. Just enough to glance through the glass walls that separated the space from the main corridor, her eyes scanning the rows of desks until she found him. Minho was sitting at his desk near the window, focused on his computer screen, his brow furrowed in concentration, completely absorbed in whatever he was working on. He was wearing a simple white button-down shirt, sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing surprisingly muscular forearms, probably from years of working with his hands on various projects. His hair was slightly messy, as if he had run his fingers through it while thinking. There was a coffee cup next to him, half empty, the logo of a cheap chain cafe rather than the expensive espresso machine in the executive lounge. A small notebook lay open beside his keyboard, covered in handwritten notes and sketches, the kind of analog thinking that seemed rare in an increasingly digital world. He looked so ordinary, so real, so completely different from everyone else in her orbit, from the executives who wore $1,000 watches and the investors who name-dropped famous people at every opportunity. And for some reason she couldn't quite explain, for some reason that both intrigued and frightened her, Seo-Yeon couldn't look away. She found herself noticing small details, the way he occasionally paused to take a sip of coffee, the slight smile that crossed his face when he figured something out, the complete lack of pretension in everything about him, from his clothes to his desk to the way he worked. "Miss Han?" Her assistant's voice broke the spell, pulling her back to reality with jarring abruptness. Seo-Yeon blinked, straightening her posture, her face settling back into its usual composed mask. "Yes, let's go." But as she walked toward the elevator, as Min-jung continued listing the day's obligations, Seo-Yeon made a mental note. Lee Min-ho, engineering department, desk by the window. She would find out more about him, not because she cared, she told herself firmly, just because it was her job to know who worked for her, to understand her employees, to identify talent that might be underutilized. At least, that's what she told herself. The alternative, that she was genuinely curious about this man who had spoken to her like a human being, was too dangerous to acknowledge. The weeks that followed were strange in a way Seo-Yeon couldn't quite articulate. She found herself noticing Min-ho in ways she hadn't noticed anyone in years, in ways that made her question her own professionalism and wonder what was happening to her carefully constructed emotional barriers. He was always the first to arrive in the morning, she realized, often at the office before 7, his desk light visible through the engineering department windows when she arrived. And he was always the last to leave, working late into the evening, long after his colleagues had gone home to their families and their normal lives. He never asked for recognition, never tried to impress her or climb the corporate ladder by networking at company events or volunteering for high-visibility projects. He simply did his work with a quiet dedication that was almost beautiful in its purity, like watching someone practice a craft they genuinely loved rather than tolerated for a paycheck. She found herself learning his patterns, though she would never admit it even to herself. He took his lunch at 1:30, always a half hour later than everyone else, probably to avoid the crowded cafeteria. He preferred the small table by the window on the 3rd floor, where he would eat whatever simple meal he had brought from home while reading technical journals or sketching ideas in his ever-present notebook. He drank his coffee black with 1 sugar, always from the cheap cafe chain on the corner rather than the premium coffee bar in the building. He was kind to the cleaning staff, she noticed one evening when she was working late, actually learning their names and asking about their families in a way that seemed genuinely interested rather than performative. He helped junior engineers with their code without being condescending. He stayed late to fix problems that weren't his responsibility, simply because he didn't want his team to struggle. And every time their paths crossed, which seemed to happen with increasing frequency, though Seo-Yeon couldn't quite say if that was coincidence or if she was subconsciously arranging her schedule to facilitate these encounters, he smiled at her. Not the practiced, political smile she was used to, the smile that people wore like masks when they wanted to make a good impression. A real one. The kind that made his eyes crinkle slightly at the corners, the kind that seemed to say he saw her not as CEO Han Seo-Yeon, but as simply Seo-Yeon, a person worthy of a genuine smile. The kind that made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she was more than a title and a bank account and a reputation for ruthlessness in business dealings. One afternoon in late autumn, when the leaves were turning gold and red outside the office windows and the air had taken on that crisp quality that promised winter was coming, Seo-Yeon was reviewing a critical project proposal in the conference room on the 15th floor. The proposal was for a new AI integration system that could potentially revolutionize their product line, but something about the numbers wasn't sitting right with her. She had spread papers across the large glass table, her laptop open, her reading glasses perched on her nose, completely absorbed in trying to identify the flaw in the logic when the door opened. Min-ho walked in, carrying a laptop and a stack of papers, clearly expecting the room to be empty. He stopped when he saw her, his eyes widening slightly in surprise. and for a moment they just looked at each other across the conference room. "Oh, I'm sorry, Miss Han. I thought this room was empty." "I needed a space to work on the presentation for next week's engineering review, but I'll come back later." He was already turning to leave when Seo-Yeon surprised herself by speaking, but Seo-Yeon shook her head, gesturing to the chair across from her, making a decision that felt both impulsive and inevitable. "Stay. I could use a second opinion on this proposal. You're in engineering. Tell me if I'm missing something." Minho hesitated, clearly uncertain about whether this was a genuine request or some kind of test, then slowly walked over and sat down. Seo-Yeon slid the proposal across the table to him. "It's the new AI integration system. The projections look good on paper, but something feels off. The timeline seems too optimistic." For the next hour, they worked together, and Seo-Yeon found herself genuinely engaged in a way she hadn't been in a business meeting in years. Minho leaned over the documents, his analytical mind immediately identifying issues she had sensed but couldn't quite articulate. "Here," he said, pointing to a section of the timeline. "They're assuming perfect conditions for the implementation. No bugs, no integration issues, no learning curve for the end users. In reality, you should probably add at least 3 months to this timeline, maybe 4. He pulled out his notebook and started sketching a more realistic timeline, explaining his reasoning as he went. Seo-Yeon was impressed by his insight, by his ability to see problems from angles she hadn't considered, by the way he could explain complex technical concepts in language that made sense even to someone whose expertise was business rather than engineering. But she was more impressed by his manner. He wasn't intimidated by her, didn't try to agree with everything she said just to please her. He challenged her ideas respectfully, offered alternatives when he thought she was heading in the wrong direction, and listened carefully when she explained her perspective, actually considering her points rather than just waiting for his turn to talk. It was the most stimulating conversation she'd had in months, perhaps years. "What about the cost projections?" Seo-Yeon asked, leaning forward, her earlier papers forgotten as she became absorbed in this analysis. "They seem low for the amount of custom development required." Minho nodded, flipping through the pages until he found the budget breakdown. "They are low. They're not accounting for the fact that our current infrastructure will need upgrades to support this system. See this section here? They're assuming we can use our existing servers, but the processing requirements for this AI system are at least double what we currently have capacity for. You're looking at significant hardware investments that aren't in this budget." They went back and forth like this, dissecting the proposal, identifying flaws, proposing solutions. Seo-Yeon found herself laughing at one point when Minho made a dry comment about the overly optimistic assumptions in the original proposal, actually laughing in a business meeting, something she couldn't remember doing in years. The sun moved across the sky outside the windows, the afternoon light turning golden, and neither of them noticed the time passing. As the meeting ended and Minho gathered his things, carefully stacking his papers and closing his laptop, Seo-Yeon found herself speaking before she could stop herself, before her logical mind could intervene and remind her about professional boundaries. "You're talented, Minho. Why are you still in engineering? You could be leading your own team, managing major projects. You have the skills, the insight. Most people would be actively pursuing advancement." He looked at her with those honest eyes, those eyes that seemed to see through all her defenses to something real underneath, and smiled softly. "I like what I do, Miss Han. I'm not interested in titles or power or climbing the corporate ladder. I just want to create things that matter, to solve problems that make a difference. Management means meetings and politics and spending more time managing people than actually doing the work. That's not what I want." He paused, seeming to consider whether to say more, then continued. "I watched my mother work herself to exhaustion chasing promotions, thinking each new title would finally make her happy, would finally be enough. It never was. She died when I was 23, still chasing that next level. I decided then that I would measure my life differently. Not by titles or money, but by whether I was doing work I loved and treating people with kindness. Everything else is just noise." Seo-Yeon felt something crack inside her chest, a small fissure in the armor she had spent years building, carefully constructed to protect her from exactly this kind of vulnerability. A small fissure that let in light and air and the terrifying possibility of connection. "That's rare," she said quietly, her voice softer than she intended. "That kind of self-awareness, that kind of contentment. Most people spend their whole lives chasing more." Minho tilted his head, studying her with a gentleness that made her feel exposed in a way that had nothing to do with business or professional vulnerability and everything to do with being seen as a human being. "Is it rare? Or have you just been surrounded by the wrong people, Miss Han? Not everyone wants to conquer the world. Some of us just want to live in it peacefully, doing work we're proud of, connecting with people who matter." And then he left, leaving Seo-Yeon alone in the conference room, staring at the empty chair where he had been sitting, feeling something she hadn't felt in years, something dangerous and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Hope. The possibility that maybe there were still good people in the world, people who meant what they said, people who could see her as more than a means to an end. But hope, as Seo-Yeon had learned through hard experience and bitter lessons, was a dangerous thing in her world. Hope made you vulnerable. Hope made you careless. Hope made you believe that maybe this time would be different, that maybe this person wouldn't disappoint you or use you or break your heart. And danger was about to walk through her door in the form of Kang Ji-won, arriving like a storm dressed in designer clothes. He arrived on a Tuesday morning in early November, unannounced, his presence filling her office like expensive cologne, barely masking the smell of entitlement and arrogance. His assistant had called the previous afternoon asking for a meeting, but Seo-Yeon had declined, her schedule genuinely full with quarterly reviews and strategic planning sessions. Apparently, Ji-won had decided that her schedule didn't matter. He simply showed up, charming his way past her assistant with that practiced smile, walking into her office as if he owned it, as if the entire building and everyone in it existed for his convenience. Ji-won was everything Seo-Yeon's world expected her to want, everything that society and her industry and every business magazine profile suggested should be her perfect match. Tall, at least 6 feet, with the kind of height that commanded attention. Handsome in that polished, almost artificial way of someone who spent considerable time and money on his appearance, his skin perfect, his hair styled by expensive stylists, his teeth unnaturally white. Wealthy beyond measure, heir to the Kang Industries empire, a conglomerate that had fingers in everything from construction to electronics to pharmaceuticals. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than a car, perfectly tailored to his frame, paired with a watch that cost more than most people's yearly salary, Italian leather shoes so polished they reflected the light. His hair was styled perfectly, not a strand out of place, held in position with some expensive product. His smile was practiced and predatory, the smile of someone who had never been told no and didn't intend to start hearing it now. "Seo-Yeon," he said, using her first name without permission, without having earned that right, as if they were old friends or lovers instead of business acquaintances who had met exactly twice at charity galas, both times for less than 15 minutes of polite conversation. "You're even more beautiful than I remembered, and that suit..." He let his eyes travel over her in a way that made her skin crawl despite the professional cut of her clothing. "Navy blue. Classic. Powerful. It suits you." Seo-Yeon didn't smile. Her face remained perfectly composed, cool and professional, giving nothing away. She gestured to the chair across from her desk with one elegant hand. "Mr. Kang, I wasn't aware we had a meeting scheduled. My assistant should have informed you that my calendar is fully booked today. I have quarterly reviews starting in 30 minutes. Ji-won sat down anyway, leaning back with casual confidence, with the ease of someone who had never been uncomfortable anywhere, never been told he wasn't welcome. He crossed one leg over the other, his expensive shoe reflecting the morning light streaming through the windows. "We don't have a meeting scheduled, but I couldn't stop thinking about you after the gala last month. The way you commanded that room, the way every person there wanted your attention, your approval. It was captivating. I thought it was time we got to know each other better." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to something he probably thought was intimate but came across as calculated. "Our companies could benefit from a partnership. The Kang Industries distribution network combined with Aurora Tech's innovations. Think about what we could accomplish together. And so could we, personally. I think you and I could be quite powerful together, Seo-Yeon." There it was. The proposition wrapped in flattery like poison in candy. The business deal disguised as romantic interest. the assumption that she would be flattered by his attention rather than insulted by his presumption. Seo-Yeon had heard it 1,000 times before, in 1,000 different variations. From 1,000 different men who thought their money or their status or their looks entitled them to her time, her company, her affection. This was just another version of the same tired script. "I'm not interested in a partnership, Mr. Kang," she said coolly, her voice professionally polite but with an edge of steel underneath. "Aurora Tech is doing fine on its own. We have our own distribution channels, our own strategic partnerships. We don't need Kang Industries." Ji-won's smile didn't falter. If anything, it widened, as if her rejection was exactly what he had expected, and he was prepared to enjoy the challenge. "I admire your independence, Seo-Yeon. I really do. It's one of the things I find most attractive about you, but even the strongest empires benefit from allies, from combining resources and power. Think about it. Kang Industries and Aurora Tech together, we would be unstoppable. We could dominate not just the Korean market, but expand globally in ways neither of us could manage alone." He leaned forward even more, his eyes darkening with something that made Seo-Yeon's instincts scream danger, though his smile remained pleasant. "And between you and me, Seo-Yeon, I always get what I want. Always. I'm a very patient man when the prize is worth the wait. And you, my dear, are definitely worth the wait." Before she could respond, before she could tell him in clearer terms that she wanted nothing to do with him or his company, there was a knock on the door. Min-ho entered, carrying a folder, his presence like fresh air in a stuffy room. "Miss Han, you asked for the updated projections for the quarterly review." He stopped when he saw Ji-won, his expression shifting to something cautious, protective, his body language subtly changing as if he could sense the threat in the room. Ji-won turned, sizing Min-ho up with barely concealed disdain, his eyes traveling from Min-ho's simple button-down shirt to his non-designer shoes, clearly categorizing him as beneath notice, as someone who didn't matter. "And who is this?" His tone made it clear he considered Min-ho little more than an interruption, an inconvenience. "Lee Min-ho," Seo-Yeon said, her voice firm, protective in a way that surprised even her. "One of my lead engineers." It was a small lie, a slight exaggeration. Min-ho wasn't technically a lead engineer, but in that moment, Seo-Yeon felt the overwhelming need to protect him from Ji-won's judgment, to give him status and importance in Ji-won's eyes, to make it clear that he mattered, to her company, to her. Min-ho placed the folder on her desk with careful precision, bowed politely to both of them with proper Korean formality, and turned to leave. But not before his eyes met Seo-Yeon's for just a second, for one brief moment of connection. A silent question hanging between them, conveyed in that one look. "Are you okay? Do you need help? Should I stay?" The concern was genuine, unmistakable, and it touched something deep in Seo-Yeon's chest. After Ji-won left, finally taking his unwanted presence and his thinly veiled threats with him, making vague promises to reach out about dinner that Seo-Yeon had no intention of accepting, she sat at her desk for a long moment, feeling unsettled in a way she couldn't quite articulate. She had dealt with men like Ji-won before, men who thought their wealth and status entitled them to whatever they wanted, men who saw her as a prize to be won rather than a person to be known. But there had been something particularly unsettling about him. Something in his eyes that suggested he wouldn't take no for an answer, that he was the type of man who considered rejection not as a final answer, but as a temporary obstacle to be overcome. She reached for the folder Min-ho had brought, trying to focus on work, trying to push the uncomfortable encounter out of her mind. But as she opened it, a piece of paper fell out. A handwritten note on simple white paper, the handwriting neat and clear. Seo-Yeon picked it up, her heart beating faster as she read the words. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. Not as an employee, not because of your position or your company. Just as someone who understands what it's like to feel alone in a crowded room, to smile when you want to scream, to carry weights that no one else can see. You don't have to carry everything by yourself. Sometimes the strongest thing we can do is admit we need help. My desk is always open, Miss Han. Or if you prefer somewhere more private, there's a small cafe on the corner of 3rd and Maple that makes terrible coffee but has the best view of the sunset in Seoul. I'm there most evenings around 6. No pressure, No expectations. Just an offer of friendship from someone who sees you. Seo-Yeon's hands trembled as she read the words once, then twice, then a third time, each reading making something in her chest tighten and expand at the same time. How did he know? How could he possibly know what she felt? The loneliness that haunted her in her expensive penthouse, the exhaustion of always being strong, always being in control, always having the answer. She had spent years perfecting her mask, hiding any hint of vulnerability, presenting herself as invulnerable and self-sufficient. But somehow, Min-ho had seen through it. Somehow, he had looked past the CEO to the woman underneath, the woman who sometimes stood by windows at midnight and wondered if anyone would care if she simply disappeared. She looked at the clock. 5:30. The quarterly reviews could wait until tomorrow. The emails could wait. The 1,000 small decisions that demanded her attention could wait. For once, for the first time in years, Seo-Yeon decided to do something just because she wanted to, not because it was required or expected or strategically advantageous. That evening, instead of going home to her empty penthouse, instead of staying late at the office staring at spreadsheets until her eyes burned, instead of any of the 1,000 other ways she usually filled her time, Seo-Yeon found herself walking to the engineering department. It was late, past 9, and most of the office was empty. The fluorescent lights had dimmed to their evening setting, creating pools of shadow between the workstations. Her heels echoed in the silence, each click sounding impossibly loud. But Min-ho was still there, just as she had somehow known he would be, headphones on, completely absorbed in something on his screen, his face illuminated by the blue-white glow of his monitor, his fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him, gathering the courage to speak, wondering what she was doing here, what she was risking by letting her guard down even a fraction. He was so focused, so completely absorbed in his work. And there was something almost peaceful about watching him, about seeing someone who loved what they did so much that they lost track of time doing it. Finally, she knocked softly on the glass door. He looked up, surprised, pulling off his headphones, his expression shifting from concentration to concern to something that might have been happiness in quick succession. "Miss Han? Is everything okay? Did something happen?" He was already standing, already moving toward her, his first instinct concern for her well-being rather than worry about why the CEO was at his desk so late. Seo-Yeon stepped inside, closing the door behind her with a soft click, creating a small bubble of privacy in the empty office. For the first time in years, she let her guard down completely. Not just a crack in the armor, but a conscious decision to be vulnerable, to be honest, to be human. "I read your note," she said quietly, her voice softer than her usual CEO tone, less controlled, more real. "Thank you." Min-ho's expression softened, worry and kindness mixing in his eyes. "You don't have to thank me. I see you, Miss Han. I see you standing by those windows late at night when you think no one's watching. I see the way your smile never quite reaches your eyes in meetings. I see the way you hold yourself so carefully, like you're afraid that if you let go even a little, everything will fall apart. And I thought maybe you needed to know that someone sees you. The real you, not the CEO, not the success story in business magazines. Just you." Tears burned at the corners of Seo-Yeon's eyes, but she refused to let them fall, years of training and emotional control asserting itself even now. But her voice betrayed her when she spoke, cracking slightly on the words. "Why do you care?" she whispered, the question coming from somewhere deep and wounded inside her. "You don't know me. Not really. You know the version of me that walks through this office. You don't know the rest." Min-ho took a step closer, careful not to invade her space, but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his eyes, could feel the warmth of another human being after so long in the cold. His voice was gentle when he spoke, patient and kind. "I care because everyone deserves to be seen, Miss Han. Everyone deserves to know that they matter beyond what they can do or what they can provide. Even CEOs, especially CEOs. Everyone thinks that people in your position have it all figured out, that you're somehow above the normal human need for connection and understanding. But you're not. You're human. You hurt. You get tired. You feel alone. And I care because seeing someone carry that kind of weight alone and not offering to help, that would make me complicit in your loneliness. And I can't do that. And in that moment, something fundamental shifted in Seo-Yeon's carefully constructed world. The walls she had built around her heart, the defenses she had erected after being hurt and used and disappointed, began to crumble. Not all at once, not in a dramatic collapse, but slowly, like ice melting under warm sunlight. Brick by brick, the barriers came down under the steady weight of Minho's genuine kindness, his unconditional offer of friendship, his ability to see her as a person rather than a position. The following weeks were a blur of stolen moments and quiet conversations, of a connection that grew deeper with each passing day despite all the logical reasons it shouldn't, despite all the professional boundaries they were crossing, despite the vast differences in their positions and backgrounds. Seo-Yeon and Minho began meeting after hours, at first in the office under the pretense of work discussions, and then gradually in places that had nothing to do with Aurora Tech. That small cafe he had mentioned, the one with terrible coffee but the best sunset views. A quiet park near the river where they could walk without being recognized. A small bookstore in an older part of Seoul where Minho liked to browse technical manuals and Seo-Yeon discovered she enjoyed poetry again for the first time since university. They talked about everything and nothing. He told her about his childhood, growing up poor but happy in a small apartment in one of Seoul's less fashionable neighborhoods, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to make sure he could get an education, who taught him that kindness was the greatest wealth a person could possess and that character mattered more than money. He spoke about her with such love and respect that Seo-Yeon felt something ache in her chest, realizing how different his upbringing had been from hers, how his poverty had been rich in love while her modest middle-class childhood had been emotionally barren, her parents focused on advancement and status rather than connection. She told him things she had never told anyone, about the loneliness of success, about how each milestone she achieved felt hollow because there was no one to share it with, no one who cared about her accomplishments for her sake rather than what they could gain from them. She spoke about the weight of expectations, the pressure of being responsible for 3,000 people's livelihoods, the fear of making a wrong decision that could cost jobs and destroy families. She confessed the fear that haunted her in quiet moments, the terror that maybe she had traded everything meaningful for success, that maybe when she died, her obituary would list her achievements but no one would mourn the person she had been. And slowly, carefully, like spring flowers pushing through late winter snow, they fell in love. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It wasn't the whirlwind passion of romance novels or the instant attraction of movies. It was soft and steady and inevitable, like rain turning into a river, like seasons changing, like something that had always been meant to happen finally finding its time. Minho brought her coffee in the mornings, always remembering exactly how she liked it despite the fact that she had only mentioned it once in passing. Not the expensive imported beans she kept in her office, but simple coffee from that chain cafe he frequented, and somehow it tasted better than anything she had ever had before. He left small notes on her desk when he knew she had difficult meetings ahead, simple encouragement that meant more than expensive gifts ever could. You've got this. Remember to breathe. You're stronger than whatever they throw at you today. Seo-Yeon started leaving work earlier, sacrificing her evening hours in the office, the time she used to spend buried in work to avoid going home to emptiness. Now she had somewhere to be, someone to see. She found herself checking the clock eagerly as 6 o'clock approached, found herself smiling in meetings when she remembered something funny Minho had said, found herself thinking about him at odd moments and realizing with equal parts joy and terror that she was falling in love. They walked through parks as autumn turned to winter, their breath visible in the cold air, talking under streetlights that turned everything golden and soft. They shared meals in small restaurants where no one knew her name, where she could be just Seo-Yeon instead of CEO Han, where she could laugh loudly and not worry about maintaining her image. He taught her to see Seoul differently, not as a city of business and competition, but as a place of small, beautiful moments. The way light reflected off the Han River at dawn, the smell of street food from vendors who had been at the same corner for 30 years, the sound of children laughing in playgrounds, the quiet dignity of old people feeding pigeons in parks. For the first time in her adult life, Seo-Yeon felt like she could breathe, like she could take off the armor, even if just for a few hours, and remember what it felt like to be simply human, to laugh without calculating the impression she was making, to share her fears without worrying they would be used against her, to be vulnerable without being punished for it. Minho never asked her for anything, never tried to leverage their growing relationship into career advancement, never suggested she invest in something or introduce him to important people or use her connections on his behalf. He simply wanted her, the woman behind the title, the person behind the power. And that was more valuable than anything money could buy. But Ji-won was watching. He always was. He had noticed the way Seo-Yeon looked at Minho, the way her cold exterior softened whenever the engineer was near. And it infuriated him. Kang Ji-won was not a man who accepted rejection. He was not a man who lost. And if Seo-Yeon wouldn't come to him willingly, he would make sure she had no other choice. Ji-won began his campaign with subtlety. He started appearing at Aurora Tech more frequently, always with some business excuse, always finding ways to insert himself into Seo-Yeon's orbit. He sent gifts, lavish and expensive, each one more extravagant than the last. Jewelry, designer handbags, invitations to exclusive events. Seo-Yeon rejected them all, but Ji-won was patient. He knew that to break her, he would need to destroy the one thing that made her happy. Lee Min-ho. One afternoon, Ji-won invited Seo-Yeon to lunch under the pretense of discussing a potential merger. She agreed, if only to get him to stop pestering her. They met at an upscale restaurant, the kind where privacy was guaranteed and every dish cost more than a week's salary for most people. Ji-won was charming, attentive, playing the role of the perfect gentleman. But halfway through the meal, he leaned forward, his smile turning cold. "I've been doing some research on your company, Seo-Yeon. Very impressive, but I couldn't help but notice something interesting." He pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. Inside were photos of her and Minho, walking together, laughing together, sitting close on a park bench. Seo-Yeon's blood ran cold. "What is this?" she asked, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. Ji-won's smile widened. "Just some observations. You see, I care about you, Seo-Yeon, and I'd hate for your reputation to be damaged by questionable associations. A CEO dating an employee. It doesn't look good, especially when that employee comes from such humble beginnings. People might think you've lost your edge, that you're being taken advantage of." Seo-Yeon's hands clenched into fists under the table. "Minho is not taking advantage of me." Ji-won shrugged. "Maybe not, but perception is everything in our world, and I can make sure the right people perceive it the wrong way. Unless, of course, you reconsider my proposal. Work with me, Seo-Yeon. Be with me, and I'll make sure your little secret stays safe." It was blackmail, pure and simple. Seo-Yeon stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not afraid of you, Ji-won." His smile never wavered. "You should be." That night, Seo-Yeon couldn't sleep. She paced her penthouse, the city lights blurring through her tears. She loved Minho. She knew that now, beyond any doubt. But she also knew the power Ji-won wielded. He could destroy her reputation, tank Aurora Tech's stock, make her life a living hell. And worse, he could hurt Minho, ruin his career, make sure he never worked in the industry again. The next morning, Seo-Yeon made a decision. She called Minho into her office. He arrived with his usual smile, but it faded when he saw her expression. "What's wrong?" Seo-Yeon forced herself to stay calm, to keep her voice even. "Minho, we need to talk. About us." His eyes widened slightly. "Okay." She took a breath. "I think we made a mistake. Whatever this is between us. It was unprofessional. I'm your boss. You're my employee. It can't continue." Minho stared at her, disbelief and hurt flickering across his face. "You don't mean that." Seo-Yeon looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "I do. I'm sorry, Minho. But this is for the best." "For the best?" His voice was quiet, broken. "Or because someone told you it was?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. If she spoke, she would break. Minho took a step forward, his hand reaching out as if to touch her, then falling back to his side. I don't believe you, Seo-Yeon. I know you. I see you. And I know you feel the same way I do. It doesn't matter what I feel, she said, her voice cracking. This is how it has to be. Min-ho stood there for a long moment, his eyes searching hers, looking for the truth she was trying so hard to hide. Finally, he nodded slowly. If that's what you want, I'll respect it. But I want you to know something. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I love you. Not because you're rich or powerful, but because you're you. The woman who stands by the window at midnight. The woman who pretends she doesn't care but carries the weight of the world on her shoulders. I love you. And no matter what you say, I always will. And then he left. Seo-Yeon collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands, tears streaming down her cheeks. She had done what she thought was right. She had protected him. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like losing the only real thing she had ever had. Days turned into weeks. Seo-Yeon threw herself into work, trying to bury the pain under spreadsheets and meetings. But every time she walked past the engineering department, every time she saw an empty coffee cup or a handwritten note, she thought of Min-ho. And it hurt. Ji-won, meanwhile, was relentless. He called her constantly, showed up at her office, made it clear that he expected her to fulfill her end of the bargain. But Seo-Yeon refused. She had pushed Min-ho away to protect him, but she would not give Ji-won what he wanted. She would rather lose everything than be owned by him. One evening, as Seo-Yeon was leaving the office, she found Min-ho waiting by her car. He looked tired, his eyes shadowed, but there was a determination in his expression that made her heart ache. Min-ho, what are you doing here? He stepped forward, his voice steady. I know what he did. Kang Ji-won. I know he threatened you. I know that's why you pushed me away. Seo-Yeon's breath caught. How? Min-ho smiled sadly. I'm not stupid, Seo-Yeon. I know you. You don't scare easily. But you do protect the people you care about, even if it means breaking your own heart. He reached out, gently taking her hand. You don't have to do this alone. Let me help you. Let me stand with you. Tears filled Seo-Yeon's eyes. He'll destroy you, Min-ho. He'll make sure you never work again. I can't let that happen. Min-ho cupped her face in his hands, his touch warm and grounding. I don't care about my career. I don't care about any of it. I care about you. And I'm not going to let him win. In that moment, Seo-Yeon realized something. She had spent her entire life trying to be strong, trying to carry everything on her own. But real strength wasn't about standing alone. It was about having the courage to let someone stand with you. She leaned into Min-ho's touch, her tears falling freely now. I'm scared. He pressed his forehead to hers, his voice a whisper. I know, but we'll face it together. Ikrim, the battle with Ji-won came to a head at the annual Aurora Tech Gala. It was the company's biggest event of the year, attended by investors, partners, and media from around the world. Ji-won had secured an invitation, of course, and arrived in full force, his presence commanding attention. He found Seo-Yeon near the bar, cornering her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You look stunning tonight, he said, his voice dripping with false charm. It's a shame you've been avoiding me. Seo-Yeon met his gaze coolly. I have nothing to say to you, Ji-won. His smile faded. Is that so? Because I have plenty to say to you. And to everyone here. He gestured to the crowd around them. I wonder what they would think if they knew the truth about you and your little employee. Before Seo-Yeon could respond, Min-ho appeared at her side. He looked different tonight, dressed in a simple black suit, his hair styled, his eyes calm and resolute. If you're going to tell the truth, Mr. Kang, then tell all of it. Ji-won's expression darkened. And who are you to speak to me? Min-ho stepped forward, his voice clear and unwavering. I'm Lee Min-ho, and I'm in love with Han Seo-Yeon. The room fell silent. Every eye turned to them. Seo-Yeon's heart pounded in her chest. Min-ho continued, his gaze never leaving Ji-won. You tried to manipulate her. You threatened her. You tried to make her believe that love was a weakness, but you're wrong. Love is the only thing that makes us strong. Ji-won's face twisted with rage. "You're nothing. A nobody. You think you can challenge me?" Minho smiled. A real smile, the kind that held no fear. "I already have." He turned to Seo-Yeon, taking her hand. "I don't care what anyone thinks. I love you. And if the world judges us for it, then let them." Seo-Yeon felt tears streaming down her face, but this time they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of freedom. She looked at Minho, at this man who had seen her, truly seen her, and loved her anyway, and she made her choice. She turned to the crowd, her voice strong and clear. "Minho is right. I'm in love with him, and I don't care who knows it." The room erupted. Whispers, gasps, cameras flashing. Ji-won stood there, his face pale with fury and humiliation. But Seo-Yeon didn't care. For the first time in her life, she was free. Free from expectations. Free from fear. Free to love and be loved. In the weeks that followed the gala, there were consequences, just as Seo-Yeon had known there would be. Some investors pulled out, uncomfortable with what they perceived as unprofessionalism, unable to separate her personal life from her business acumen. Some partners questioned her judgment, suggesting that her emotional decisions might compromise her strategic thinking. The media had a field day, with headlines ranging from sympathetic to sensational. "CEO chooses love over image," one proclaimed. "Han Seo-Yeon's shocking romance," another declared. Her phone rang constantly with reporters seeking comment, with business associates offering unsolicited advice, with people she hadn't heard from in years suddenly wanting to reconnect. But Aurora Tech didn't crumble the way Ji-won had hoped it would, the way he had probably predicted with malicious satisfaction. In fact, something unexpected happened. The company grew stronger. Because Seo-Yeon led with a new kind of strength, one born not from isolation but from connection, not from fear but from love. She was still sharp in negotiations, still brilliant in strategy, still ruthless when necessary. But now there was something else too. Compassion. Understanding. The ability to see her employees as people rather than resources, because Minho had taught her to see herself as a person first. Employee satisfaction ratings went up. Productivity increased. Innovation flourished because people felt safe taking risks, knowing their CEO understood that failure was part of growth. And Aurora Tech's stock, after an initial dip that had Ji-won celebrating prematurely, climbed to new heights as the market realized that Seo-Yeon's judgment was as sound as ever, that her personal life had made her a better leader rather than a weaker one. And by her side, always, was Minho. Not as an accessory or a trophy, not as someone riding her coattails to success, but as an equal partner in a relationship built on mutual respect and genuine love. He continued working in engineering, refusing the executive position she offered him, content with the work he loved. But he was there when she needed to vent about a difficult decision, there to remind her to eat when she got lost in work, there to hold her hand when the pressure felt overwhelming, there to celebrate victories and mourn setbacks. Ji-won, meanwhile, faded into the background like a storm that had passed, leaving damage but ultimately proving less destructive than it had threatened to be. His threats had lost their power once Seo-Yeon had stopped caring about his opinion, once she had stopped letting fear of judgment dictate her choices. His manipulation had been exposed at the gala, and the business community, whatever their private opinions about Seo-Yeon's choices, had little patience for Ji-won's vindictive behavior. His own reputation suffered as word spread about his tactics, as people realized that his interest in Seo-Yeon had been about control and ego rather than genuine feeling. He tried to save face, appearing at industry events with a different beautiful woman on his arm each time, making shows of generosity and charm. He tried to rebuild his image, to convince people that he had simply been concerned for a fellow business person, that his warnings about Seo-Yeon's unprofessionalism had been motivated by care rather than spite. But the damage was done. People had seen his true colors, had witnessed his cruelty and his need to control. His business continued successfully enough, his family's empire too large and established to be seriously threatened by social disapproval. But his reputation never fully recovered. In the end, he was just another man who had mistaken control for love, who had equated possession with affection, and who had lost everything meaningful because he had never understood the difference. 1 year later, On an evening in late autumn when the air had that same crisp quality that had been present when Seo-Yeon and Min-ho first worked together in the conference room, they stood on the rooftop of Aurora Tech. The company had just closed its most successful quarter ever, but that wasn't why they were there. They were there because this rooftop, visible from Seo-Yeon's office 42 floors below, had become their place. Somewhere they could be away from the world. Somewhere they could just be themselves. The sun was setting over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple, the city stretching before them, beautiful and chaotic and full of life. The lights were beginning to come on across the cityscape, millions of them, each one representing a life, a story, a journey. The Han River glowed gold in the dying light. The mountains in the distance were silhouetted against the colorful sky. Traffic sounds drifted up from far below, the pulse of the city continuing its eternal rhythm. Min-ho wrapped his arms around Seo-Yeon from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, his warmth a comfort against the cool evening air. She leaned back into his embrace, into the safety and acceptance she had found with him, feeling utterly content in a way she had never imagined possible. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. "The consequences, the judgment, everything you had to face because you chose us." Seo-Yeon smiled, genuine and bright, the kind of smile that reached her eyes and lit up her face, the kind of smile she had rarely managed before Min-ho. "Not for a second," she said with absolute certainty. "Not a single moment. I would do it all again, face all of it again gladly." She turned to face him, her eyes bright with love and certainty, and a happiness so profound it still sometimes surprised her. "You taught me something, Min-ho. Something I thought I knew but didn't really understand until you showed me. You taught me that the greatest empire isn't built from money or power or success. It's built from love, from trust, from letting someone see you, all of you, the good and the bad and the complicated, and choosing to stay. From being brave enough to be vulnerable, to admit you need someone, to accept help and support and care." Min-ho kissed her forehead tenderly, his lips soft against her skin, his arms tightening around her. His voice was a gentle whisper, a promise and a declaration. "I'll always stay, Seo-Yeon, through every challenge, every triumph, every quiet moment, and every storm. I'm not going anywhere. Ever." And he did. Through every challenge that came their way, and there were many because life doesn't become perfect just because you find love. Through financial pressures and business crises and family complications, through illness and grief and the thousand small and large difficulties that make up a human life, through moments of doubt and fear and uncertainty, he stayed. Because real love isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. It's about seeing someone for who they truly are, flaws and fears and complications included, and loving them anyway. It's about choosing someone every single day, not just in the easy moments, but in the difficult ones too. And in the end, that was the only empire that mattered to Han Seo-Yeon. Not the company worth millions. Not the professional success or the industry recognition or the respect of her peers, though she still had all of those things. But the empire she and Min-ho had built together, brick by brick, moment by moment, with hearts wide open and hands held tight. An empire of two people who had found each other in a world that often felt too big and too cold and too lonely. Two people who had learned that real strength wasn't about standing alone, but about having the courage to stand with someone. Two people who had discovered that the truest power came not from controlling others, but from being vulnerable with one person who truly saw you. Han Seo-Yeon had spent her life believing that strength meant standing alone, that vulnerability was weakness, that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. But she had learned the truth that transforms lives. Real strength was letting someone stand beside you. Real power was vulnerability, the courage to open your heart knowing it could be broken. And real love was the man who saw her not as a CEO, not as a success story in business magazines, not as a means to advance his career or increase his wealth, but simply as Seo-Yeon, the woman behind the empire, the heart behind the armor, the person behind the position. And that was worth more than all the money in the world, more valuable than any business success, more precious than any achievement or recognition or power. It was worth everything. It was everything.